Have you ever felt it, that strange emotional contradiction where someone's actions show care, concern, and even devotion, yet their words never fully confirm what your heart already senses? It's one of the most confusing experiences a person can go through. You feel the connection, you feel the intensity. Sometimes you even see glimpses of deep affection in their eyes. But when the moment comes where love could be spoken out loud, silence takes its place. The words stay trapped somewhere inside them, like a truth they are afraid to release. For many empaths, this experience becomes a painful emotional puzzle. You ask yourself again and again, if they feel something for me, why can't they just admit it? What makes this situation even more difficult is that the person involved does not always act cold or indifferent. In fact, at times they may show more care than anyone else ever has. They may check on you when you're struggling, notice details about your feelings that others miss, or appear protective in subtle ways that reveal genuine concern. And yet, when it comes to acknowledging love directly, something inside them pulls back. Something inside them resists crossing that emotional line. This is the hidden struggle many avoidants experience when they fall for an empath. It's not always that the love isn't there. Often the love exists in a deep and complicated way, but the ability to admit it feels overwhelming, even frightening. For an empath, connection is something that is felt before it is spoken. Empaths are naturally tuned into emotional energy. They can sense shifts in mood, notice unspoken feelings, and read the subtle emotional signals people send without realizing it. Because of this sensitivity, empaths often recognize the presence of love long before it is verbally expressed. They notice the small gestures that others might overlook, a quiet moment of concern, a look that lingers just a little longer than normal, a sudden change in behavior when emotions grow stronger. To an empath, these signals speak loudly. They reveal what the other person may not yet have the courage to say. But this emotional awareness can also become a burden. When you sense love that is never fully acknowledged, your mind begins searching for answers. You start wondering if what you feel is real, or if you are imagining the connection entirely. The silence creates doubt, and doubt can slowly turn into emotional exhaustion. Many empaths find themselves trapped in this confusing emotional space where they feel a powerful bond but receive very little verbal confirmation. The avoidant individual may never openly admit how they feel, yet their behavior continues to suggest that the connection matters deeply to them. This contradiction can feel almost impossible to understand, but to truly see what is happening beneath the surface, it helps to understand the emotional world of someone who struggles with avoidance. At the core of this struggle is a deep fear of emotional exposure. For avoidance, vulnerability does not feel natural or safe. It feels risky. It feels like stepping into unfamiliar territory where control might be lost. When someone develops avoidant patterns, they often learn early in life that expressing feelings can lead to discomfort, rejection, or emotional pain. Over time, their mind adapts by building protective walls around their emotions. These walls are not built because they lack feelings. In fact, many avoidants feel emotions very deeply. The difference is that they have learned to protect themselves by hiding those emotions rather than expressing them openly. When love enters the picture, the situation becomes even more complicated. Love requires vulnerability. Love requires openness. It asks a person to reveal parts of themselves that they normally keep hidden. For someone who has spent years learning how to guard their emotions, this request can feel overwhelming. Saying the words, "I love you," is not just a simple statement to them. It feels like exposing their most sensitive emotional truth. It feels like handing someone the power to hurt them, even when they care deeply. The instinct to protect themselves can be stronger than the desire to confess what they feel. This internal conflict often keeps them silent, even when their heart is fully involved. Ironically, the very qualities that make an empath so appealing are also the same qualities that can trigger an avoidant's fears. Empaths have a natural ability to create emotional warmth and understanding. They listen deeply. They care sincerely. They often make others feel accepted and seen in ways that are rare. To an avoidant, this kind of presence can feel incredibly comforting. It creates a sense of safety they may not have experienced before. Being around an empath can feel like stepping into an emotional space where they are finally understood without needing to explain everything. But at the same time, that level of emotional closeness can also feel intimidating. Empaths tend to see beyond surface behavior. They notice the hidden emotions that others try to hide. For someone who has spent years protecting their inner world, being seen so clearly can be both beautiful and terrifying. It creates a strange emotional paradox. On one hand, the avoidant feels drawn toward the empath because of the comfort and connection they provide. On the other hand, they feel the urge to step back because the connection feels too intense, too revealing, too real. This is why avoidants often appear magnetically pulled toward empaths, while simultaneously resisting the depth of the relationship. They want the connection, but they are afraid of what it requires emotionally. The roots of this behavior often go much deeper than the present relationship. Long before the empath ever appeared in their life, many avoidants developed emotional patterns shaped by their early experiences. When a person grows up in an environment where emotional needs are ignored, dismissed, or met with criticism, they may learn to suppress those needs entirely. Instead of relying on others for emotional support, they teach themselves to rely only on themselves. Over time, independence becomes their primary form of protection. They convince themselves that they do not need deep emotional connections because depending on others once led to disappointment. As years pass, this mindset becomes deeply ingrained. They become skilled at managing life on their own, keeping emotions controlled and relationships at a safe distance. But when an empath enters their world, something begins to shift. The empath's presence challenges the emotional patterns they have relied on for so long. Suddenly, they feel understood in ways they never expected. They experience moments of emotional closeness that feel unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. This new experience can awaken feelings they thought they had successfully buried. But awakening those feelings also means confronting the fears that were hidden beneath them. Admitting love to an empath is not just about confessing affection. For an avoidant, it means questioning the entire emotional structure they built to protect themselves. It means facing the possibility that vulnerability might actually be necessary for true connection, and that realization can be incredibly difficult to accept. This is why many avoidants struggle to admit when they love an empath, even when the emotions are genuine and powerful. Their silence does not always mean their heart is empty. Sometimes it means their heart is overwhelmed by feelings they do not yet know how to express. Sometimes it means they are battling fears that formed long before the relationship ever began. And sometimes it means they are standing at the edge of emotional vulnerability, unsure whether it is safe to take that final step. For the empath experiencing this dynamic, the confusion can feel deeply personal. It can create moments of self-doubt where you question your own perception of the connection. But understanding the inner struggle behind avoidance can help reveal a deeper truth. The difficulty in admitting love is not always a reflection of how little someone feels. Often, it is a reflection of how much those feelings challenge everything they believed about protecting themselves. When an avoidant begins developing real feelings for an empath, something complicated begins unfolding inside them. It is not a simple experience of love, the way many people imagine it. Instead, it feels more like an emotional tug-of-war happening within their own mind. On one side of that inner conflict is a powerful desire for connection, a quiet longing to stay close to the person who seems to understand them in a way no one else has before. They may feel calmer when the empath is around. They may feel emotionally seen in ways that surprise them. There are moments where they realize they want the connection to grow, where they feel drawn toward deeper closeness. But on the other side of this emotional tug-of-war lives something just as powerful, the instinct to protect their independence. For someone with avoidant tendencies, independence is more than just a personality trait. It is a survival strategy that has shaped their entire way of relating to the world. Letting someone get too close can feel like losing control over their emotional safety. And so while part of them wants to move closer to the empath, another part of them instinctively begins pulling away. This is the beginning of the push and pull dynamic that so many people experience in relationships with avoidance. It is not always intentional. In fact, the avoidant may not even fully understand why they feel such conflicting impulses. One moment they want the connection deeply, and the next moment they feel the urge to create distance again. To the empath watching this pattern unfold, it can feel confusing and painful. You may wonder why someone who clearly feels something for you keeps stepping back whenever the connection begins to deepen. But inside the avoidant mind, these opposing emotions are happening simultaneously, creating a cycle they struggle to break. The empath often becomes both the source of comfort and the source of fear for the avoidant. This may sound strange at first, but it explains why the relationship can feel so emotionally intense. Empaths have a rare ability to notice what others hide. They see the small emotional signals that most people miss. They feel the shifts in energy that others overlook. When an avoidant spends time with someone like this, it can feel deeply comforting because the empath offers acceptance and understanding without demanding explanations. The avoidant may find themselves opening up in small ways without even realizing it. They might share thoughts they normally keep private. They might allow moments of emotional honesty that would usually make them uncomfortable. These small openings happen because the empath creates an emotional space where vulnerability feels less threatening. But the deeper the empath sees into their inner world, the more exposed the avoidant can begin to feel. Being understood so clearly can trigger a hidden fear, the fear that their emotional walls are slowly disappearing. Those walls were built over years to keep them safe from rejection and disappointment. When someone starts seeing beyond those defenses, it can feel like their protection is fading. This is why an avoidant may suddenly retreat even after moments of closeness. The connection feels wonderful, but it also feels dangerously real. They are comforted by being seen, yet frightened by the idea of being completely known. Because avoidants struggle to express emotions openly, their love often appears in ways that are easy to overlook. While they may rarely speak about their feelings directly, their behavior can reveal far more than their words ever will. One of the clearest signs is consistency in returning to the connection. Even when they pull away, even when they create distance, something keeps bringing them back. The empath may notice that despite periods of silence or emotional withdrawal, the avoidant always seems to reappear in their life again. This pattern can be confusing, but it often reflects an inner truth the avoidant cannot ignore. Their mind may try to create space, but their heart still recognizes the importance of the connection. Another subtle sign appears in the small ways they pay attention to the empath's emotional state. Avoidants may not openly discuss feelings, but they often notice when something is wrong. They may check in quietly, offer practical help, or show concern in ways that feel understated but sincere. Instead of grand emotional declarations, their care may appear through actions that show reliability and presence during important moments. They might remember details about your life that others forget. They might show up during difficult times even if they struggle to express comforting words. These behaviors may not always look like traditional expressions of love, but they often reveal a deeper level of emotional investment than the avoidant is willing to admit out loud. However, just when the empath begins feeling hopeful about the connection, something surprising can happen. As the relationship grows closer and the emotional bond deepens, the avoidant may suddenly begin pulling away again. This shift can feel confusing and painful because it often appears right when things seem to be going well. The conversations may have become more open, the emotional connection may feel stronger than ever, and then without warning, the avoidant becomes distant. Messages become shorter, plans become less frequent. Their presence feels different, almost like they are slowly stepping back from the closeness that once felt natural. To the empath, this behavior can feel like rejection. It may seem as though the avoidant has lost interest or changed their mind about the relationship. But in many cases, the opposite is actually true. The distance often appears precisely because the feelings have grown stronger. When love begins reaching a deeper level, the avoidant's fear of vulnerability becomes more intense. The relationship is no longer casual or emotionally safe. It begins to matter in ways that challenge their sense of independence. Instead of moving closer, their instinct tells them to retreat in order to regain emotional control. This retreat is rarely about the empath doing something wrong. It is usually about the avoidant struggling with emotions they do not yet know how to handle. At the heart of this dynamic lies a difference in how empaths and avoidants experience emotional closeness. For an empath, emotional depth is where connection truly begins. Empaths naturally move toward intimacy, sharing feelings, thoughts, and vulnerabilities as a way of strengthening relationships. Being emotionally open feels natural and meaningful. But for avoidants, emotional depth can feel overwhelming because it requires them to confront feelings they have spent years suppressing. When an empath encourages deeper conversations or emotional honesty, the avoidant may feel unprepared for that level of openness. It can feel like being asked to navigate unfamiliar territory without a map. The empath's desire for closeness is genuine and loving, but it can unintentionally activate the avoidant's fears of losing control. The avoidant may worry that once emotions are fully expressed, expectations will follow. They may fear becoming dependent on someone or losing the independence that has always defined their identity. This is why the relationship between an empath and an avoidant often feels so emotionally intense. Both individuals care deeply, but they approach connection from very different emotional instincts. The empath moves closer in search of understanding and closeness, while the avoidant sometimes moves away in search of emotional safety. Despite these challenges, the bond between an empath and an avoidant can feel incredibly powerful. There are moments when the emotional connection feels almost undeniable, moments when the avoidant's walls soften and the truth of their feelings briefly shines through. In those moments, the empath may catch glimpses of the love the avoidant struggles to admit. It may appear in the way they look at you during a quiet conversation. It may appear in the way they protect the connection even while pretending it does not matter. These glimpses can be deeply meaningful because they reveal the emotional truth hiding beneath the surface, but they can also make the dynamic more confusing because the avoidant rarely stays in that open emotional space for long. After showing vulnerability, they may quickly rebuild their defenses, returning to the familiar patterns that once kept them safe. For the empath experiencing this cycle, the emotional journey can feel both beautiful and exhausting. You feel the connection strongly, yet you constantly wonder whether it will ever become fully expressed. You may question whether patience will lead to deeper honesty or whether the silence will continue indefinitely. Understanding the inner struggle of avoidance does not remove the emotional complexity of this dynamic, but it does reveal an important truth. The difficulty in admitting love often comes from fear rather than absence of feeling. When someone has spent years protecting themselves from vulnerability, even the most genuine emotions can feel overwhelming to reveal. And sometimes, the very depth of what they feel is the reason they struggle so much to say it. What many people do not realize is that for someone with avoidant tendencies, love does not just feel emotional, it feels destabilizing. Love introduces a level of unpredictability that challenges the sense of control they have spent most of their life protecting. Control is one of the silent pillars of the avoidant mindset. It allows them to manage their emotions carefully, revealing only what feels safe, while keeping the most vulnerable parts of themselves hidden. As long as they maintain that control, they feel protected from emotional chaos. But love changes the rules. When feelings become real and deep, control becomes harder to maintain. Suddenly there is another person who matters, another person whose presence or absence can influence how they feel. This emotional dependence can feel uncomfortable for someone who is used to relying only on themselves. Even if the connection is beautiful and meaningful, the idea of needing someone emotionally can create a quiet panic inside them. They may start asking themselves questions they never had to face before. What happens if this person leaves? What happens if I become too attached? What if I give too much of myself and end up hurt? These questions are rarely spoken out loud, but they exist beneath the surface of the avoidant mind. To the empath observing their behavior, the avoidant may simply seem distant or uncertain. But internally, they may be struggling with the realization that love requires surrendering some of the emotional control they have relied on for years. This is why something as simple as saying, "I love you," can feel incredibly difficult for an avoidant. For many people, those words are a natural expression of affection. They represent warmth, closeness, and emotional honesty. But for someone who fears vulnerability, those three words carry much heavier meaning. Saying them out loud can feel like stepping into a place where there is no longer any emotional protection. It is the moment where feelings can no longer be hidden behind subtle gestures or quiet care. Once those words are spoken, the emotional truth becomes undeniable. It creates a level of intimacy that feels irreversible. For an avoidant, this moment can feel overwhelming because it exposes their deepest emotions to another person. They may worry that once they admit love, expectations will grow. The relationship may demand more emotional openness, more vulnerability, more commitment. Even if part of them wants that closeness, another part fears the responsibility and exposure that come with it. This fear can cause them to hold back their words, even when the emotions inside them are genuine. The empath may feel the love in their actions, sense the connection in quiet moments, and still never hear the words spoken directly. This silence can create confusion, but it often reflects an internal battle rather than an absence of feeling. Behind this hesitation lies years of emotional conditioning that shaped how the avoidant sees relationships. Long before they met the empath, they likely learned to protect themselves by suppressing vulnerability. Perhaps they experienced moments where expressing emotions led to disappointment or rejection. Perhaps they were taught that emotional needs should be handled alone rather than shared with others. Over time, these experiences built invisible walls around their inner world. Those walls were not meant to push love away. They were meant to prevent pain from entering. But when someone new arrives who inspires real feelings, those walls suddenly become a barrier, not only to pain but also to connection. The avoidant may feel trapped between the safety of their defenses and the desire to experience something deeper with the empath. Breaking those walls is not easy. It requires confronting fears that have existed for years. It requires trusting another person with emotions they once believed should remain hidden. For someone who has spent a lifetime learning to rely only on themselves, this kind of emotional shift can feel incredibly difficult. This inner struggle is what often creates the famous push and pull dynamic between an empath and an avoidant. When the connection begins to deepen, the empath naturally moves closer. They share more of their thoughts, their feelings, their hopes for the relationship. They seek emotional understanding and closeness because that is how they experience love. But as the empath moves closer, the avoidant may start feeling overwhelmed by the intensity of the connection. The walls they built begin to feel threatened, and their instinct tells them to retreat. This retreat does not necessarily mean they want the relationship to end. In many cases, it means they need emotional space to process feelings they do not fully understand. The empath may interpret this distance as rejection, which can create pain and confusion. Wanting reassurance, they may reach out again, trying to reconnect and restore the closeness that once existed. But this pursuit can sometimes intensify the avoidant's fear of losing independence, causing them to pull away even further. The result becomes a cycle that repeats itself again and again. The empath moves closer, seeking connection, and the avoidant retreats, seeking emotional safety. Each person is acting from their own emotional instinct, yet the pattern can leave both individuals feeling misunderstood. Despite these challenges, avoidants often express love in ways that are quieter but still deeply meaningful. Because they struggle with verbal expressions of emotion, their affection tends to appear through actions rather than words. These actions may seem subtle at first, but they often reveal how much the connection truly matters to them. An avoidant may show love by being reliable when it counts the most. When difficult moments arise, they may step forward in practical ways to help solve problems or provide stability. They may not always say the comforting words the empath hopes to hear, but they demonstrate care through their willingness to be present. They might notice when the empath is struggling and quietly offer support without drawing attention to it. They might protect the relationship in ways that others would not recognize, making small sacrifices or adjustments to keep the connection alive. Their loyalty can appear in the form of consistent actions rather than emotional declarations. For the empath, learning to notice these quieter expressions of love can change the way the relationship is understood. It does not remove the desire for open communication or emotional honesty, but it helps reveal that love sometimes speaks through behavior rather than language. The avoidant may never express their feelings in dramatic or poetic ways. Their love may not arrive through grand confessions or intense emotional conversations. Instead, it may show itself through presence, reliability, and the quiet decision to remain connected even when their instincts tell them to create distance. These actions can be easy to overlook because they do not always match the traditional image of romantic expression. But for someone who struggles deeply with vulnerability, choosing to stay connected is often one of the most powerful expressions of love they can offer. When an empath begins to recognize these subtle signals, they may start seeing the relationship from a new perspective. The silence surrounding the avoidance emotions no longer appears as empty as it once did. Beneath that silence lies a complicated emotional world, filled with fears, desires, and feelings that are still learning how to be expressed. Understanding this does not mean the journey becomes easy. The relationship can still feel challenging and uncertain at times. But recognizing the hidden ways love is expressed can bring clarity to moments that once felt confusing. It reveals that the avoidant's struggle to admit love is not always about the absence of feeling. Often it is about the depth of emotion they are still learning how to face. Something very interesting often happens after an avoidant has spent time around an empath. In the beginning, they may not fully understand why the connection feels so different from anything they have experienced before. They may try to treat the relationship casually, convincing themselves that it is no different from the others they have had in the past. But over time, something inside them starts to shift. The empath's presence begins leaving a deeper impression than they expected. It may happen in small moments at first, a conversation that lingers in their mind long after it ends, a moment of understanding that feels surprisingly comforting, a feeling of emotional safety they cannot easily explain. The empath does not just interact with them on a surface level. The empath sees the emotions they normally hide. They recognize the quiet struggles that others overlook. And without realizing it, the empath begins touching parts of the avoidant's inner world that were once completely guarded. At first, the avoidant may resist this experience. They may tell themselves that they should not allow anyone to get that close emotionally. But the more time they spend around the empath, the harder it becomes to deny that something meaningful is happening. Eventually, there comes a moment when the avoidant realizes the connection is different. The empath is not simply another person passing through their life. The empath has become someone who understands them in a way that feels rare and deeply personal. This realization can be both beautiful and terrifying for the avoidant. On one hand, it awakens a powerful sense of appreciation for the connection they share with the empath. They may begin noticing how calm they feel when the empath is around. They may start recognizing how much they value the empath's presence in their life. But on the other hand, this realization also intensifies their fears. If the connection is truly special, then losing it would hurt far more than any relationship they tried to keep at a distance before. Suddenly, the emotional stakes feel much higher. The avoidant may start questioning whether they are capable of maintaining such a meaningful bond. They may worry that their own emotional limitations could eventually damage the relationship. Instead of leaning fully into the connection, they may retreat even further into their protective patterns. This is why some avoidants appear to create distance right when the relationship begins feeling the most significant. The depth of the connection makes them realize how vulnerable they have become, and vulnerability is something they have spent years trying to avoid. For the empath, this stage of the relationship can feel incredibly confusing. You may sense that the avoidant recognizes the importance of the connection, yet their behavior may still appear distant or inconsistent. You might see glimpses of their deeper feelings in certain moments, perhaps in the way they look at you when they think you are not paying attention, perhaps in the rare moments when their emotional walls soften and they allow themselves to be open even if only briefly. But then the walls return again and the distance reappears. It can feel like standing close to someone who is constantly stepping forward and backward at the same time. This emotional contradiction often leaves empaths wondering whether the connection truly matters to the avoidant at all. But the truth is that many avoidants feel far more than they ever reveal. The difficulty lies not in the absence of love, but in the fear of what love requires from them emotionally. One of the most painful truths about avoidant behavior is that many avoidants eventually recognize the value of the empath only after distance or separation has occurred. When the connection is present, their fears and defenses often dominate their actions. They may focus on maintaining emotional control rather than fully embracing the relationship. But when the empath begins pulling away or when the relationship ends, something changes. Without the constant presence of the empath, the avoidant suddenly has space to reflect on what the connection meant. The quiet moments they once avoided now become filled with memories. They remember the conversations that made them feel understood. They remember the patience the empath showed during moments of emotional distance. They remember the warmth and emotional depth that once surrounded the relationship. In those moments of reflection, the avoidant may realize just how rare that connection truly was. But by the time this realization arrives, the empath may already be gone or emotionally distant. This leads to a form of regret that many avoidants carry silently. It is not always a regret they express openly, because admitting it would require acknowledging emotions they once tried so hard to hide. But deep inside, they may recognize that fear played a major role in shaping their choices. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of needing someone too much. These fears may have prevented them from expressing the love that was quietly growing inside them. And once the opportunity for connection has passed, they may realize that protecting themselves came at the cost of something deeply meaningful. This realization can be painful, but it also has the potential to become a turning point. For some avoidants, recognizing this pattern encourages them to begin questioning the emotional defenses they have relied on for so long. The important thing to understand is that avoidant patterns are not permanent. They are learned responses shaped by past experiences, and like any learned behavior, they can change with self-awareness and emotional growth. When an avoidant begins recognizing how their fears influence their relationships, they may slowly start exploring new ways of expressing vulnerability. This process does not happen overnight. It requires patience, self-reflection, and often a willingness to confront emotional wounds that were previously ignored. But it is possible. Many avoidants eventually learn that vulnerability is not the same as weakness. They begin discovering that emotional openness can create deeper, more meaningful relationships rather than the pain they once feared. When they experience a connection with someone who shows understanding and patience, it can inspire them to slowly lower the walls they built around their emotions. For the empath, understanding this dynamic can bring a sense of clarity to experiences that once felt confusing or painful. It helps explain why someone who appeared distant may have still cared deeply. It reveals that emotional avoidance often comes from fear rather than indifference. But this understanding also invites an important realization for empaths. While empathy allows you to see the hidden struggles within others, it is equally important to protect your own emotional well-being. Loving someone who struggles with vulnerability can be challenging. It requires patience and compassion, but it should never require sacrificing your own emotional needs entirely. Healthy relationships grow when both individuals are willing to move toward openness and honesty together. In the end, the connection between an empath and an avoidant can be one of the most emotionally powerful experiences two people can share. It brings together two very different emotional worlds. One person who feels deeply and expresses love openly, and another who feels deeply but struggles to reveal it. When these worlds meet, the connection can feel magnetic, intense and transformative. The empath may help the avoidant discover emotional depth they never allowed themselves to explore before. And the avoidant may teach the empath lessons about patience, resilience, and understanding emotional complexity. But perhaps the most important truth to remember is this: sometimes the love that is hardest to express is also the love that runs the deepest. When someone has spent years protecting themselves from vulnerability, admitting love can feel like the greatest emotional risk they have ever taken. And even when the words are never spoken, the feelings may still exist quietly beneath the surface, shaping their thoughts, their memories, and their understanding of what connection truly means. For anyone who has ever loved someone who struggled to admit their feelings, your experience is not imagined. The connection you felt was real. The emotions you sensed were not simply created by hope or imagination. Sometimes love exists in places where fear has not yet learned how to let it be spoken. And sometimes the most powerful emotional truths are the ones that take the longest time to find their voice.